we're here today to talk about how we can begin to view this crisis that we're all facing through a hopeful lens. Bahai.chat offers weekly conversations that provide an uplifting moment to turn our thoughts towards spiritual ideas. Each session invites participants to consider the oneness of mankind, our individual capacities to create change, and the depths of our collective spiritual purpose. Each conversation is rooted in the teachings of Baha'u'llah, the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. The Baha'is believe that religion is progressive. We don't see the major world religions as being separate at all. In fact, it's unfortunate that these faiths that are at the foundation of every one of the world's civilizations are often in conflict with one another. This is really due to our lack of understanding. The most fundamental of Baha'u'llah's teachings, in fact, is that there is only one God, that all of the major world religions are part of God's evolving, progressive plan to bring mankind to higher and higher levels of unity. And today, God's plan is nothing less than the unification of all the peoples of the world through justice and equity. So we have no clergy in the Baha'i faith because mankind is finally called to ensure that every soul on the planet be educated. This is a human right, and it's our collective obligation to execute on that right. And with our heightened awareness through education, we're also called on to independently investigate God's truths. Nobody's faith should be conditioned on anything other than that person's search and understanding of truth. Through Bahai.chat, we aim to explore truth at the deepest level, that of spiritual reality. The Baha'i message is really one of hope. And as dark as times have been throughout history, and certainly these days, we believe that we're standing on the precipice of mankind's collective coming of age, the age of unity. So I'd like to share two brief quotes today before turning this over to our guest presenter. This first quote is from Baha'u'llah, and it's about the prerequisite to our collective well-being on the planet. The well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established. Now, the second quote is from a document authored by the Universal House of Justice, the worldwide governing body of the Baha'i faith, elected every 5 years by the Baha'is of the world. And it's a document that was addressed to the peoples of the world called the Promise of World Peace. And this is the opening of this extraordinary document, the great peace toward which people of goodwill throughout the centuries have inclined their hearts, of which seers and poets for countless generations have expressed their vision, and for which from age to age, the sacred scriptures of mankind have constantly held the promise, is now at long last within the reach of the nations. For the first time in history, it's possible for everyone to view the entire planet with all of its myriad diversified people in one perspective. World peace is not only possible, they write, but inevitable. It is the next stage in the evolution of this planet. In the words of one great thinker, they quote, "The planetization of mankind." Now this document, The Promise of World Peace, you can Google it, Promise World Peace Baha'i, and it'll come up. You can read the entire document. It really is just wonderful and uplifting and gives us a vision for where we're going. Well, Anissa, why don't you tell us a little bit about the remaining agenda here and introduce our awesome guest speaker today?
Yeah, sure. Well, we're so excited to have everybody here with us. We will have a presentation today about how all of these global challenges that we're experiencing bring about opportunities for spiritual reflection and raise questions about sort of this essential nature of our human conditions. We're going to follow the presentation with a little bit of a Q&A. So we invite you during the chat, if you have any kind of a question that you think of, you can send it in the chat box, which actually I don't see. Do you guys see a chat box on your screens? I don't see one.
While you're looking for it, I'm just going to mention, because I see we're up to 100 and almost 40 people, an apology to those who didn't hear the apology when we first came on the line. We discovered 20 minutes before this call, without any notice, just coming to the call, that Zoom chat is now requiring of all Zoom chats a code. And we have scrambled to try to get this listed on Facebook and Instagram and so forth. We've sent a quick email out, but I'm sure some of you were frustrated trying to figure it out. We apologize for that on behalf of Zoom chat. I do not see that. Maybe that's the next test they're providing us today.
Yeah. So I will double check on the chat box. When we get to the Q&A portion, we will refresh people on how, the best way to send in a question. But so during the presentation, think about questions that you might have. And then afterwards, after an hour, we'll say our goodbyes and log off.
And if you find your button, if you find your chat, you can put your questions in as we go here. They'll be lined up for us.
Yeah. So we're very delighted to share that our guest presenter today is Rainn Wilson. Rainn is best known for playing the role of Dwight Schrute on NBC's The Office, and he has additional credits in projects like The Rocker, 6 Feet Under, Juno, and many, many more. He is appearing on upcoming series Utopia and The Power. He is the co-founder of Soul Pancake, a digital media company, and the Lide Foundation, which is an educational initiative in rural Haiti to empower at-risk women and girls through the arts. We are so delighted to have him with us. So with that, Rainn, you have the floor.
The floor? I have the virtual floor?
Screen, whatever you want to call it.
I have the grid. This is really awesome. Can you guys hear me okay? Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear me all right? Okay, excellent, excellent. A lot of Baha'is on here. I didn't know there'd be so many Baha'is online, but welcome to my Baha'i brothers and sisters, people that I know. And welcome everyone else. Thanks for tuning in. David, thanks for that introduction. I apologize for how messy my office is back there, but you know, we're under quarantine, folks. So I haven't found the time to clean it up. And I muted my camera because my guinea pig back there was squeaking so bad. I had to put him in a box and put him in the closet, because otherwise it would have been the entire talk. It would have just been like, wee, 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 which would have sucked. So I also apologize for my hair. I tried personal grooming today for the first time in about 2 weeks. And this is about as best as I could do. And it's really pathetic. It's very hard for me to get my hair to look normal in any way, shape, or form. This is about the best I could do. So here we are. This is cool. This is the second week that David and Anissa have launched this Bahai.chat function to have weekly Baha'i talks. There will be other things branching out from Bahai.chat, but what a great idea. What a great time to launch this, you know, on a couple of levels. Technologically, everyone's getting used to Zoom meetings and Skypes and Google Chats and Hangouts and stuff like that. So that's great timing, but also the timing for what everyone is going through right now, which is pretty extraordinary. David mentioned a few kind of large universal concepts about the Baha'i faith. I thought I would just talk briefly about the Baha'i faith, and then I wanted to talk a little bit about my personal story, because sometimes we can get very highfalutin and big concepts, and I wanted to kind of ground things a little bit in my personal experience, and then we can move to some giant universal spiritual humanitarian concepts as we go. But the one thing I want to say, the first thing I want to say is that in the Baha'i faith, for those of you who don't know, and apologies, there's people on the chat that I see that are far more deepened and enlightened and educated about the Baha'i faith than I am, but there's no clergy in the Baha'i faith. So I'm just an actor who happens to be a member of this religion and loves to speak on spiritual topics and on big ideas and have kind of big conversations on big meaty topics like life and death and love and the soul and free will and stuff like that. That's kind of my passion beyond playing weird characters on shows like The Office and many others. So I'm not a clergy member. What I'm saying is just my opinion. It's my experience. You know, all the other Baha'is are going to have different opinions and experiences, and that's fine. They'll all have their chance. So I grew up a member of the Baha'i faith. My parents became Baha'is in the late 60s, and so many people became Baha'is. The Baha'i, I don't know what the statistics were, but the Baha'i community grew exponentially in the late 60s and early 70s. And for a very good reason. People all over the world at that time were, especially in the Western world, were looking for spiritual solutions to the world's problems. I think there's a lot of parallels between that time and this time. The world had effectively collapsed. The Eisenhower years way of doing everything had collapsed by 1963-64 with the assassination of Martin Luther King and JFK and Malcolm X and Robert Kennedy, and civil rights blew up. We realized all of a sudden people kind of woke up, well, white people at least woke up and were like, oh my God, we live in a racist country. The Vietnam War was happening. People were like, wait a second, there's all these body bags being sent home. We're spending all this money on this military industrial complex. And just everything kind of fell apart. And at that time, the Beatles were visiting the Maharishi, and Cat Stevens became a Muslim, and even Steve Jobs went and lived on a Buddhist ashram. People were exploring the possibility that there might be a spiritual solution to the pain that the world was in. And that's the parallel that we're in today. I'll get more on that later. So I grew up in this milieu in the 70s, in a religious faith where there was a lot of singing. There was a great deal of diversity. The elimination of racial prejudice is super important in the Baha'i faith. There were Black Baha'is and brown Baha'is and Native American Baha'is and Inuit Baha'is and every conceivable kind of class, you know, PhD Baha'is and truck driver Baha'is, and incredibly diverse. The equality of women and men was very important in the Baha'i faith. The harmony of science and religion. The fact, like David mentioned, that all of these different religious faiths really come from one source and are really different branches of one kind of religious system that has at its heart the spiritual maturity of the human race. These are the concepts that I grew up with and I loved. It was a very loving community. It was a little bit hippie-ish. But then I moved to New York City and wanted to become an actor in my college years. And I really rebelled against my parents. I didn't want anything to do with how my parents saw the world, how they did things. So I turned my back on religious faith. I didn't want any morality hanging over my head. I wanted to do things my own way. I wanted what I wanted when I wanted it. And my dream was to go to New York City and be an artist. I came from very poor background in suburban Seattle and in Washington State. My family didn't have much. We used to get my clothes from the Salvation Army. We couldn't afford milk, so I would drink powdered milk instead of milk growing up. I'm not trying to humble brag about poverty. I'm just saying that I'm using this to illustrate a point that for a guy like me to go from a public high school to NYU to study acting and try to be a professional artist was a big stretch. I didn't know anyone that was an artist, but this was beyond my wildest dreams. My dad was a painter and a writer and very talented, but I didn't know anyone that like made money from being an artist, that had a profession of artist. That was just an alien concept to me and any of my friends. All their fathers were truck drivers and fishing boat drivers and stuff, plumbers and stuff like that. My dad was a plumber. So I cast away everything having to do with faith and dove into my acting work and got acting training. I'm not going to go into the whole long story because we don't have time and I want to get to some other ideas, but basically what happened for me is I started to really, when I look back on it now, I was suffering a real mental health breakdown. I had put all of my higher power became my career and being an actor. And I started having crippling anxiety attacks. I started having crippling depression. I felt really unmoored, and it didn't make any sense to me because I was working as an actor. I had gone to acting school. I got an agent. I got out. I was auditioning for plays and getting roles and doing pretty well. I mean, I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was getting cast in cool plays with great directors. It's beyond my wildest dreams. And if you're living a life that's beyond your wildest dreams, you're supposed to be happy, right? But I was really, really unhappy for years. So that's when I started a spiritual search, kind of my phase 2 of my life, phase 3 of my life, kind of a spiritual search in my mid-20s that went up through my mid-30s. And it was a search of like, maybe I threw the baby out with the bathwater when I got rid of religion and spirituality and morality and anything having to do with the life of the soul or the spirit. And this kind of emptiness that I felt inside, this disconnectedness that I felt, really drove me to try and find a spiritual solution because nothing else was really working. So I started reading the holy books of the world. I went to Buddhist gatherings and synagogues and churches and mosques and different religious gatherings. I started really exploring the world's faiths and beliefs and traditions. I read a lot of books about Native American spiritual traditions, which really kind of opened my eyes to the possibility that God was something other than a judgmental old white man with a beard on a cloud scowling down at us. The idea from the Lakota Sioux that God who was entitled Wakantanka, which means the great mystery, that God is in nature, of nature, within nature, without nature, beyond time and space, the God of our ancestors, the God of the animals, the God of the wind, the God of the 7 directions, north, south, east, west, up and down, and then the 7th direction internally, the God of in our hearts. Opened my eyes to new ways of seeing the world in a spiritual lens that I hadn't seen before as a teenager and kid growing up as a Baha'i. So that's when I kind of went back to starting to read the Baha'i holy texts. And one difficulty for young Baha'is, and I see there's some young Baha'is watching, is we grow up with our parents' version of the Baha'i faith. And we might take some classes, like Sunday school type classes, and learn a few quotes. We haven't really read the meaty works, you know, the works of Baha'u'llah, who is the prophet founder of the Baha'i faith. I should probably mention Baha'u'llah. I think I skipped over that in my description of the Baha'i faith. So Baha'is believe that all of these holy prophets throughout time, the Buddha, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, Muhammad, are continuing God's message, and that Baha'is are followers of all of them, and also followers of a new holy teacher, a new divine teacher called Baha'u'llah, whose name means the glory of God. And Baha'u'llah lived in Persia and the Middle East in the mid-1800s and brought his message of unity for all of humanity. And some of those teachings that I went over earlier were some of his teachings. So when I started to really read the works of Baha'u'llah, that's when a light bulb went on, and I realized that I had really jettisoned the good with the bad, and that I needed to redefine my faith for myself. And at this time, there were 2 writings of the Baha'i faith that I want to underline and emphasize. And Anissa, if we could put up that first quote. The first one was that one of the central teachings of the Baha'i faith is the independent investigation of truth. So this is a quote by Baha'u'llah's eldest son, Abdul Baha, who was a very holy man in his own right and was the leader of the Baha'i faith for many decades. And here's a quote about this idea that we need to find the truth for ourselves. Another new principle revealed by Baha'u'llah is the injunction to investigate truth, that is to say, no man should blindly follow his ancestors and forefathers. Nay, each must see with his own eyes, hear with his own eyes and ears, and investigate the truth himself in order that he may follow the truth instead of blind acquiescence and imitation of ancestral beliefs. There's a lot more to this teaching than just this quote, but I will say that I had a realization, like, I went on my spiritual path and I needed to find the truth for myself. I needed to greatly suffer and had a lot of setbacks and trauma and ups and downs during that time, but I needed to find the truth for myself. Now, this quote may seem a little obvious to some young people watching out there. I see Ben Altair and Roshni Mehra watching this, and they may say, oh, well, that's pretty obvious. Find the truth for yourself, duh. But this is a revolutionary concept coming from the mid-1800s from the Middle East. Find the truth for yourself? That simply did not happen anywhere in the world, let alone Persia and the Middle East, the Caucasus, Palestine, the areas that Baha'u'llah was living in. That absolutely was not an option. If your great-grandfather went to the mosque and your grandfather went to the mosque and your father went to the mosque, then doggone it, you're going to go to that same mosque. If they were cobblers, then you're going to be a cobbler. You don't have a choice in the matter. You don't say, like, I'm going to spend a gap year being a kayak instructor and check out Buddhism. Like, no, that's not an option. It's very much an option these days. But I think the important thing for me was a realization that that's the journey that I had been on, and that's okay. And number two, part of that is, and I think the important thing for the young people watching today is that no man should blindly follow his ancestors and forefathers, it says in the quote, and investigate the truth for himself instead of the truth of blind acquiescence. And I think, and we can get rid of the quote right now, Anissa, go back to the video. The important thing is to, nowadays, I think the more important thing about the independent investigation of truth is to look outside what society is telling you. Because society is trying to lay a lot of kind of BS on everybody. And it's no one's fault. I'm not blaming a particular political party or politician or cabal of men that are controlling things with puppet strings or anything like that. It's just the way society has developed. We live in a very materialistic society that tells us that happiness can be had through buying more stuff. It's commercialization, materialism. It's part of the perils of capitalism. There's some positive things to capitalism and there's some drawbacks to capitalism. But this constant need to convince people to buy things in order to be happy and satisfied is one of the drawbacks. The idea that status, being liked, getting likes on social media and having a high status will also make us happy and fulfill us. There's so many things that are just backwards that our society is telling. There's many, many things, that racial injustice and social injustice that's going on. I could go into a whole talk about it, but I think the thing I want to highlight for young people is, as you look for the truth for yourself, please cast a very cold, keen, almost critical eye on what society is telling you is true and what society is telling you is important. Because one of the things that society has done is kind of eliminated a spiritual foundation for how we do things. So it is super important to understand that we are spiritual beings on a spiritual journey, and love and unity and peace and compassion one to another is the most important thing to build both our personal relationships and our foundationally our social relationships and culture off of. And society has really cast that aside. Let's go to the next slide. The next quote that I wanted to read to you was about the arts. So I had spent all this time becoming an artist, a theater artist, and then a television and film actor. And one of the quotes I stumbled on, and there were many quotes, hundreds of quotes, about how the arts are crucial to crucial is the wrong word, how the arts are a form of worship. This was from a letter that Abdul Baha wrote, again, the eldest son of Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith. He said, I rejoice to hear that thou hast taken pains with thine art. For in this wonderful new age, art is worship. The more thou strivest to perfect it, the closer wilt thou come to God. What bestowal could be greater than this, that one's art should be even as the act of worshiping the Lord? That is to say, when thy fingers grasp the paintbrush, it is as if thou wert at prayer in the temple. So a couple of beautiful lines. In this wonderful new age, art is worship. When you perfect it, you become closer to God. One's art is as worshiping the Lord. When your fingers grasp the paintbrush, metaphorically, it could be the computer keyboard or the sculpture that you're making or the dance piece you're working on, it is as if thou wert at prayer in the temple. So this was incredibly important and galvanizing for me as a young artist to realize, wait a minute, all of those years that I spent building my career and at the same time in a great deal of despair and anxiety, as I was searching for the truth for myself and being an artist, they were not in vain. They were actually very much a part of my spiritual journey, that I was, again, seeking the truth for myself on my journey of independent investigation of truth. And that I was trying to, sometimes failing, sometimes succeeding, making art that illuminated the human condition and told stories and made the world a better place. I think about that in terms of The Office these days, which all of a sudden out of nowhere just became like the most popular show in the history of humanity. I don't know what happened, but people, young people especially, really embraced it. And there's streaming and there's Netflix and it's the #1 show. And that's all wonderful. But what really matters to me is the messages I get from people of, you know, I was really depressed. I was really sad. My family was going through a hard time. My sister was sick. My parents were getting a divorce, whatever it was. And The Office just brought me so much comfort and cheer and warmth to my heart. And getting to be a part of that was really special. And I don't want to be arrogant and say that's a divine act, but all of us actors and the writers on the show and the directors on the show spent decades perfecting their craft to try and tell beautiful, true, funny human stories. And that resonates with an audience. And that in itself is an act of prayer, is an act of worship. So I think about God being known as the creator, or some people call God the creator. And that's what an artist does. There's a blank page and you paint a beautiful picture, you write a poem on it, you write a screenplay on it. There's an empty stage, an actor comes out, they tell a story, there's a dance piece that happens on the stage. There's an empty pottery wheel and all of a sudden the pot is grown. Whatever your art is, there's an empty, quiet space and someone plays a violin and it's filled with this music that transports us. That is a divine act. God is the creator. We're emulating the divine creator in our act of creating something and making something. This is very much a part of the Baha'i faith tradition. But let's skip ahead a little bit. That's kind of a little bit of my personal story. I could go much deeper into it, but I've got about another 5 or 7 minutes here, and then we'll take some questions. We'll see if we figure out a way to get questions across. You could always write them on a piece of paper and then put them up to the camera. So
we'll have a formal slide to kind of talk people through a little bit, but I think we're just going to ask people to send them to us through social media. So we'll put our handles up on the screen when Rainn's finished, but you can send them on Instagram and Facebook.
Or do what I say and write it and hold it up to the camera. That. But yeah. I don't know if you have to write it backwards or not. You have to write it backwards. I don't know how it works.
We're all learning. You want the next quote up?
No, it's not backwards.
No, it's perfect.
There we go. We'll plug for one of my books. The not quite yet. So let's skip ahead to, that's a little bit more of my personal story. One of the things I discovered as I was kind of re-entering into the Baha'i faith in my late 30s and early 40s. Thank you, Roshni. Thanks for the plug. Appreciate it. Thanks for buying the book. The was a realization that the spiritual path is twofold. We have a twofold, as we say in the Baha'i faith, a twofold moral purpose. That is to make ourselves a better human being, which a spiritual path can help with. Prayer, meditation, working on our spiritual virtues, right? Compassion, kindness, honesty, humility, developing those things, that personal mystical path, connection to the universe. And that's where a lot of people might be experiencing that in like a yoga class or meditation workshop or something like that. That's the kind of personal aspect of spirituality. And it's the foundation and super important. There's another aspect of the spiritual path, and that is the other branch of the twofold moral path, to try and make the world a better place. So spirituality is great if it helps you transform inside, but if you're not able to take that from inside and then connect with others and build community with others and make the world a better place on a more universal level, then it's kind of useless, because we're 7+ billion people on the planet with all kinds of social injustices going on. And we're fighting and on the verge of war, and all kinds of difficult things are happening at the same time. And part of our spiritual path is being in service to humanity. And that's a big part of what Baha'is do or are tasked to do. Some Baha'is struggle to do is not just work on their personal transformation, but be of service in their communities in every conceivable way, philanthropy and in whatever field that you're in, to try and bring people together and build systems from the grassroots that are based on spiritual principles. That's not about converting people to Baha'i faith. You know, by the way, you're welcome to join the Baha'i faith, but that's not really what this talk is about. It's really about having a spiritual conversation and kind of shifting the framework. So in that sense, we'll talk a little bit about coronavirus. There have been a lot of we've seen both sides of this virus. We've seen people stockpiling toilet paper. We've felt and seen and maybe experienced anxiety, fear, depression going on. What's going to happen? Perhaps some of you have loved ones or friends that are sick. Perhaps some of you have had loved ones and friends that have died. It seems like maybe it's going to get worse before it gets better. There's a lot of fear. At the same time, there has been increased building of community at the same time, like people reaching out to each other, using social media, using screens, not just to play video games and surf Instagram pictures of meals, but actually like connect with people, build community like we're doing right here, having a spiritual conversation and talk. There's been much more people expressing their gratitude for their friends and loved ones, for what they have. All kinds of ways that we've seen our vision change from our nationalistic small vision, like, oh, we're Americans, or oh, we're Ecuadorians, or oh, we're Mongolians, or whatever nationality we happen to, by a roll of the dice, been born into, to see us like, no, we're a species on a planet. As David said, the spiritualization, the planetization of mankind, I would say the spiritual planetization of mankind. We're seeing that happen as boundaries fade away, and like, oh, we're all one human species. I wonder how my brothers and sisters in Italy are doing. I hope my brothers and sisters in China are doing well. I hope this really doesn't hit some of the poorer areas where they don't have hospitals and respirators. There's a greater connection to a global unity. So two things are happening simultaneously, and I think it can be very confusing for young people. And now we can bring up the quote. Because I think young people, I say young people, I'm pretty old, so anyone younger than 54 is young people. But they get confused because they're like, oh, there's all this great stuff happening. And it's like, oh, and there's all this terrible stuff happening. You know, there's racism and nationalism and violence and threats, and there's Zoom bombing, people bombing Zoom meetings to put up porn and stuff. And It's just like these horrible things are happening at the same time, the threat of war. So this is, I said there's no clergy in the Baha'i faith. The Universal House of Justice is the elected body of people that runs the affairs of the global Baha'i community. They're based in the Baha'i Holy Land in Haifa, Israel. That could be a whole 5-hour talk on itself on how all of that works and whatnot. I'm not going to go there right now, but this is from a letter from the Universal House of Justice. And I think it's really important to, beautiful graphic, by the way, Anissa, well done. I think it's really important to see what's happening in the world through this lens. It's been very helpful to me. Baha'is are encouraged to see in the revolutionary changes taking place in every sphere of our life, the interaction of two fundamental processes. One is destructive in nature, while the other is integrative. Both serve to carry humanity, each in its own way, along the path leading towards its full maturity. Though devastating in their effects, the forces of disintegration tend to sweep away barriers that block humanity's progress, opening space for the process of integration to draw diverse groups together and disclosing new opportunities for cooperation and collaboration. Baha'is, of course, strive to align themselves individually and collectively with forces associated with the process of integration, which they are confident will continue to gain in strength, no matter how bleak the immediate horizons. Human affairs will be utterly reorganized and an era of universal peace inaugurated. There's a lot there. We'll leave this up on the board for a little bit. You could screenshot it if you want. There's a lot in here, but I think this is exactly what we're seeing. We're seeing two things happening at the exact same time, and this is why it's so confusing and disconcerting. There are incredible movements of integration, of love, of connectivity, of community, of globalization, of people coming together, and there's incredible movement at the same time of disintegration, things falling apart, mental health epidemics, drug epidemics, opioid crisis, materialism, nationalism, war, people pitting others, dividing into groups, dividing and creating chaos and disunity. And both of these things are happening at the same time. So it's kind of like, what do I focus on? Well, here's what you can focus on. You don't have to be a Baha'i to focus on that. Strive to align yourselves individually and collectively with forces associated with the process of integration, which will gain in strength, no matter how bleak the immediate horizons. So Baha'is believe that an era of universal peace is coming. It's around the corner. It's down the bend. We may need to go through some really hard times in order to get there. Personally, I needed to go through some very hard times to come to some kind of spiritual understanding in me. And believe me, I'm not perfect at this. I fail all the time. I'm not trying to be some guru or some person who's achieved nirvana or something. It's a daily struggle against my ego and narcissism and envy and character defects that I have, et cetera, et cetera. But we have that internal struggle, that internal jihad, that internal struggle, and we have that, again, that universal struggle, that the spiritual path has two branches, an internal transformation and the external serving to unite people together, to make the world a better place, to integrate people, to call on more cooperation and collaboration as humanity goes through these difficult times, leading ultimately to its full maturity and to universal peace. So that's a little bit of my story. That's what I wanted to share with you, a little bit about my personal story and a little bit about these two moral paths that we have and the fact that there's these two forces of integration and disintegration, and they're both vying to go to the top. And we can all, regardless of our faith belief, seek to align ourselves with the forces of integration on the planet and to be of service in that way. So thank you very much for letting me talk to y'all. All right, Anissa.
Thank you, Rainn, so much. So we, as mentioned, we're going to have some Q&A. You can send us any questions on Instagram and Facebook. We have our handles for both of those on the screen right now. And just to give a little bit of time, I'm going to pass it over to David, who is going to share some announcements.
Excellent. Thank you, Anissa. Great talk, Rainn. Thank you so much really for being here. While we're waiting just for a moment or two for people to have time to write your questions, I actually have a question, but before I do, if you have questions and did not have an opportunity to ask them here, please visit our website. It's a really cool, easy thing to remember. They have added registry domain suffixes just recently, and one of them is chat. So it's not .com or anything like that. It's just Bahai. You can remember that. No diacritical marks or apostrophes. Bahai.chat. That's it. You'll come to our site. You can learn about the folks. We've got an amazing roster of folks that are coming up on various subjects, race unity, on the Baha'i Faith's position on law. We have some incredible women that will be coming on in the next several weeks as well. And so visit our website, put questions to us. If you've come to this through a social media ad or post and don't have a connection with the Baha'i and would like a connection, we've got a stable of young folks who are delighted to field your questions, guide you to your own personal investigation. So take advantage of that. Okay, so I actually won't do my question. I've got a question from Stephen Collins here. Rainn, would you share stories of radiant moments in the current crisis, just things that you've heard personally? And if that puts you on the spot, the thing that I was thinking about, so you could go either of these directions, was if there was an aha moment for you as you went through your struggle and you were coming back to looking at the faith, something that, you know, really moved you or something that triggered you. So there are a couple of things on the table for you to wrestle with. Make your choice and do what you will.
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know that I have anything that springs to mind. I think that, excuse me. I think that I don't have any specific stories that come to mind, like, oh, here's a great story that illuminates this thought. But I do remember after 9/11 happened, the world felt in a similar place. And that was this terrible, terrible tragedy, catastrophic. And I don't want to belittle it in any way, shape, or form. However, the unity and community that formed out of literally the ashes of that was incredibly beautiful. And the problem is it faded, you know, and 8 months later, 9 months later, we were back at it. And it was even worse because we were at wars, a bunch of unjust wars in Iraq that no one wanted any part of, and spending billions and billions and billions of dollars on. And I feel the same way of that same thing going on now, that this is terrible. Thousands have already lost lives, tens of thousands more will lose lives, and want to really sit with that and honor that. And that's the tragedy around that. Tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions will lose jobs and have great economic difficulty. Don't want to underestimate that as well. But at the same time, to see that people are coming together in ways that I've never seen before, hearing from friends I haven't heard from a long time, people caring, we're all in this together, feeling our hearts connecting. And it's been very beautiful. I've been doing this show every day at noon on the Soul Pancake Instagram channel called Hey Human, where I interview random humans from the internet. And it means so much to people to see a random person from Poland or Texas or Pennsylvania being interviewed about how they're coping with these crises and how we're all in this together, and we're all scared, we're all vulnerable, we're all funny, we're all strong. We're beautiful souls going through this process. So that's as specific as I can get. Thank you.
So, Rainn, we have actually a question that maybe is a follow-up. I think in a way you sort of answered this in the last part of what you said, but I've got a question from Ben. Maybe we can just develop on that theme. What are ways that you can help folks around you who respond to the pandemic with panic and fear to find calm and resolution, to make something constructive from the chaos, to find victory in the crisis? Another good question.
Yeah, very good. How can you help others? I think the best way to help others is to really help yourself. And there's very specific tools from not just the Baha'i tradition, all the faith traditions, and also from the field of positive psychology, which is has a lot of great, very specific tools that are very much in alignment with people's spiritual paths. You know, daily meditation and prayer, if you can add prayer to that, is super important. The benefits of meditation are too numerous to go into. And you just have to do it for 5 minutes. It's just realizing we're not our thoughts, slowing things down, taking some breaths, being in the moment. It increases your happiness, your dopamine levels, you sleep better, you listen better. I mean, there's all kinds of benefits to meditation. And one of the other things I'm always talking to people on Soul Pancake about, and my social media followers and do shows about, is the power of gratitude. So I think one thing to do is to share gratitude with people. Like, what are we grateful for? Yes, there are all of these really negative things, and they have to be honored. But at the same time, no matter what your circumstances, even if you've had a family member die and you're a certain unemployment, there are things that you can put your heart focus on that are positive and uplifting and connecting. Even the fact that we're alive, that we're having a breath, that it's a beautiful day, that there are birds in the trees, whatever it is. And again, the health benefits, the mental health benefits, and physical health benefits, and spiritual health benefits of expressing that gratitude, which is one of the things we do in prayer. There's a tremendous amount of gratitude in prayer itself. A lot of times it's gratitude towards God, towards the divine, for the gifts that we've been given and the bounties we've been given. But that expression of gratitude, both personally, and if that's something we can share with people, you know, I have a group of guys and we do a daily gratitude text chain. So every day we check in with each other about, did we do our meditation today? And what are we grateful for? We just send out 3 things we're grateful for and say, great, every morning we keep that going. So we're meditating and we're expressing and sharing gratitude.
Yeah, I'd like to just add something to that. I think I wasn't aware of your Soul Pancake program, and you made the comment how, you know, folks were just delighted to be connecting with folks from another place they might not have known, especially we're all sequestered, we're all, you know, in our homes. And I think that so many people that I've talked to are feeling just this sense, it's almost crazy to say it, almost a sense of joy and enthusiasm. Things are happening, opportunities are crossing their paths. I know for me, just the creation of this program, which I think I've driven everybody crazy. Everything we've done, we did in about 2 weeks. And Anissa, it's been so delightful. Anissa and Josefina and others, because this is a time, it's an opportunity. And I think that just being able to open these conversations, I know you're doing it on a lot of different levels. It seems like so many people that I've talked to are finding that they're busier now, that we're cloistered and in this, you know, period than maybe they were even before. So I think, you know, there are opportunities for all of us to go there. I've got another question here about, you know, folks in different parts of the world that are experiencing this. And you and I are both involved very much in different projects in Haiti. Tell us a little bit about Lide and tell us what your perspective is in terms of what's going on in Haiti with this pandemic versus, you mentioned in your talk, folks that, may not even have the ability to wash their hands. That itself is complicated. We have so many resources here. So talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Yeah, so my wife and I are involved with some educational initiatives, one called the Mona Foundation. And we took a trip to Haiti before the earthquake and visited these schools down there. And we're supporting these schools and building classrooms and raising money to build classrooms. And it was a really beautiful experience, an amazing country. The people are awesome. The culture is vibrant, radiant, funny. The music is great. The cuisine is great. The countryside is beautiful. And it has abject poverty and has been screwed over by other countries and by its leaders for centuries. We really fell in love with it. And then the earthquake hit. So my wife and I wanted to do something. We went to Haiti a couple months after the earthquake, and we taught these arts workshops for adolescent girls. And we really fell in love with the power of doing arts. I taught theater. My wife's a writer, a fiction writer. She taught creative writing. And we saw how powerful this work was. So we, along with Dr. Catherine Adams, we started an initiative for education and empowerment of adolescent girls in some of the poorest parts of Haiti. Some of the poorest parts of Haiti are some of the poorest parts in the world. And they're kids that have never had shoes and never had breakfasts. And like David said, they've never had soap to wash hands. We're stockpiling the Purell and they've never had soap. So the fear of places, of this hitting places like Nigeria or Haiti or poor places that don't have the resources, Bangladesh, to is terrifying. So our organization, we're doing a lot of stuff to do trainings. We're doing health trainings. We're training the girls. We have a health worker on staff. She's getting training around in various hospitals, bringing it back. Our girls are getting trained and our girls are spreading it to the communities. So about social distancing, which is a very alien concept in Haiti because everyone's very touchy-feely, grabby, huggy, completely alien. So the hand washing, basic sanitation and hygiene issues and what to look for and with the coronavirus. So that's a big part of what my wife and I do in our life. Thanks.
I was muted there. Let me just mention something else I think that's important. And again, for those who may be coming on the call, on the chat and learning about Baha'i for the first time, go to our website and let us know, sign up, but send us emails as well. The Baha'is have been engaged for the last 30 years or so in a process where we are connecting with folks of other religions and folks of no faith at all. I was an atheist before I became a Baha'i, and there are people that are struggling with their own sort of question about their belief, and yet they care about the world, and they're doing, some of them are certainly doing wonderful things. So we're working around the world in tens of thousands of communities across the planet in terms of developing our own spiritual identity and the service that Rainn was talking about. And I just read today, and if you want to get connected in your own community, let us know. With the Institute process, it's going on all over the country as well. That that a group in Italy, a group of youth who have been working together for some time, have actually developed an outreach where through the media they're communicating, much as we're doing, about these kinds of principles and so forth. And they are, they've just arisen on their own. Some of them are 15, 18 years old, and this is what they're doing. There's another group in New York that as soon as the virus really became sort of a focus, they realized that older people might have difficulty getting access to food, and they went out and made some calls. They found some groups that would donate food. They found a storehouse that they could start to assemble, and they began delivering food. And it was so effective that local leadership decided to get involved. They send in the National Guard, who began, working with them and basically took over the project. And these are things that folks are doing now all over the world, not just Baha'is, but others as well. What book did you read regarding the Lakota faith? That's for you, Rainn.
You guys can all see that. Yeah. Thank you for asking that question, Sharon. People ask me that a lot, and I just am kicking myself because I can't remember. I was reading so many books at the time, and I know I read one called, which is vaguely racist, and forgive me, it's an older one, but it has some real good stuff in it. It's called The Gospel of the Red Man. And there's Black Elk Speaks is really a great one. I highly recommend. But the main one that had, there's Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, which describes a massacre there and kind of history of injustice against Native peoples. But the actual book that was about the Lakota spiritual tradition, I can't remember what it was. So I'll have to research that and figure it out.
Okay, well, we're moving on. We try to keep this tight to an hour. We thank you so much, Rainn, for joining us. And again, we apologize. Those that didn't hear the apology, we found out 20 minutes before this program started that Zoom instituted a new policy where you can't get to a Zoom call without a special code. And so we scrambled to figure it out. I'm sure there were a lot of people that we weren't able to communicate with, but we're delighted that you all could join us. We've got a great lineup. We hope you'll come back next Saturday at 2:15. And there you see the info at Bahai.chat if you'd like to reach out to us or visit the website. Anissa, can we open up all the mics and people can just say goodbye to each other?
Yeah, my screen is sharing. So Josefina, can you unmute people? And I just wanted to say also, so you can check out our website, Bahai.chat. We have, if you go down to the bottom, you can sign up for the newsletter.
Thank you.
You got a lot of people.
Thank you, people. Thank you, Rainn. Thank you very much.
It's really nice. I enjoyed it very much. You're all
Thanks for
wonderful.
coming.
Thank you.
Keep from Nashville.
Keep from
Rachel
Greece.
here.
All the smiles.
Look, my thumb just.
Sorry, I went to the dispensary and bought like a
Thank
little,
you.
they got a vape
It's fun to talk.
cartridge. And I'm like, all right, this is
All right, see you, people.
I need
much.
that. So
Cheers from Mexico.
I got pretty baked. I was out for
Nashville,
about
Tennessee.
an hour and a half or so.
Muito obrigado.
And went to go eat bomb Indian food.